Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for joining the Philadelphia Commission for Women for what we expect to be an engaging evening with our guests, Dr. Bettye Collier-Thomas, Dr. Elena Baker-Rogers, and Fasaha Traylor. Welcome to Harriet Tubman and the Future of Democracy. This discussion is part of a citywide celebration of the 200th anniversary of the birth of Harriet Tubman and a traveling sculpture called The Journey, currently on view on the north apron of City Hall. I'm Javita Hill, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Commission for Women and the Mayor's Office of Engagement for Women. Our office is responsible for providing advice and recommendations to the mayor, city council, and the city's public decision makers around issues of gender equity and social justice. To this extent, at full capacity, we are comprised of 27 appointed members. Each of 17 council members appoints a commissioner, and the mayor appoints 10 people. This program is the opening of our month-long series, Your Voice, Your Power, Your Vote, Making Democracy Work. Full schedule of our virtual events are in the chat. And we thought it was very important to include this because at this juncture, we do know that every election counts, every vote counts, and it means now as much as it did in Harriet Tubman's day. So with that being said, it is my honor to present representatives of our co-sponsors for this evening, the Philadelphia chapters of the National Organization for Women and the League of Women Voters, and Johnson House Historic Site. Vanessa Fields is president of the Philadelphia chapter of the National Organization for Women, and she also is my friend and my partner in the struggle, who also chairs the Philadelphia Commission for Women. Melissa Wright is first vice president of the Philadelphia chapter of the League of Women Voters. And Cornelia Swanson, who has not joined us yet, and if she does, I'll let her speak to you about Johnson House Historic Site in Germantown, if she is able to join us. And so with that being said, Vanessa?
Okay. So good evening. It's a pleasure for Philly Now to be one of the sponsors for this discussion of Harriet Tubman and the future of democracy. NOW is one of the oldest feminist organizations in America. It was founded in 1966, and we currently have over 500 chapters throughout the United States. Our 6 core missions are economic justice, reproductive justice, gender equality, combating racism, ending violence against women, and constitutional equality. Philly Now was established in 1971. So some of our recent highlights of Philly Now have been our town hall on reparations, our solidarity ride supporting the woman who was victimized on the SEPTA L, our letter to City Council demanding action regarding the Cure report to address gender and racial inequality within the 1st Judicial District. So please visit our website for more information about Philly Now and also to join. Thank you and enjoy this incredible discussion tonight.
Thank you, Vanessa. Melissa.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here with you all today and for the program that we're about to just totally enjoy. To give you some more background about the League of Women Voters, or the League for short. So we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that was formed to help women take a larger role in public affairs of the country after they won the right to vote. And it began as this mighty political experiment aimed to help newly enfranchised women exercise their responsibilities as voters. So today the League operates at the local, state, and national level. So there are over 1,000 local leagues including the Philadelphia League, which is one of them, as well as 50 state leagues. Our primary purpose is to encourage voting by registering voters, providing voter information, and advocating for voting rights. In addition to the core mission of voting, we support a variety of progressive public policy positions, including campaign finance reform, universal health care, abortion rights, climate change action, and environmental regulation and gun control. In Philly specifically, the League has been active for over 50 years. Some of its most notable work was actually back in the 1970s, looking at the city charter and some reforms that are still in place today. The one thing that I'll note as we are ending Black History Month and moving into Women's History Month, that I always say when I talk about the League is that racism was an underlying factor throughout the suffrage movement, and the League was not immune to that. So it's important to note that this organization, or our organization, was not welcoming to women of color throughout most of its existence. But today we are working hard to right that wrong, and we invite all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, or gender, to join us as we commit to building a stronger and more inclusive democracy. So feel free to look us up. Our website is lwvphilly.org. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Vanessa and Melissa. And thank you for all the amazing work that you do. I am so honored that we have such a stellar panel for our discussion tonight. Dr. Bettye Collier-Thomas is professor of history at Temple University. She served as the inaugural director of the Temple University Center for African American Culture. Dr. Collier-Thomas developed the National Endowment for the Humanities Technical Assistance Program for Black museums and historical organizations. She was the founder and first executive director of the Mary McLeod Bethune Memorial Museum and the National Archive for Black women's history. Among her numerous publications is Jesus, Jobs, and Justice, Daughters of Thunder, Black Women Preachers and Their Sermons, Sisters in the Struggle, African American Women in the Civil Rights, Black Power Movement, African American Women and the Vote. Welcome, Dr. Collier-Thomas. I am so honored. Just as a little aside here, they say the third time is the charm. This is the third time I've wanted to include Dr. Collier-Thomas in one of our programs, and finally. Also joining the conversation is Dr. Alina Baker-Rogers and Fasaha Traylor, who are authors of They Carried Us, The Social Impact of Philadelphia's Black Women Leaders. Dr. Baker-Rogers holds a PhD in higher education leadership, and she has served as a university administrator and assistant professor of educational research. She is the recipient of both the Jane S. Abrams and Cecil B. Moore Community Service Awards. Also joining us this evening is Fasaha Traylor, who is a 22-year veteran of philanthropy and is now a principal of Lift Every Voice, LLC. She was awarded the National Science Foundation Fellowship, the Art Peters Memorial Fellowship for Journalism, and the Temple University Urban Fellowship. This will be the second year that Dr. Baker-Rogers and Ms. Traylor have joined us to commemorate Black History Month. I am so very privileged to continue our collaboration. Welcome. So I think I'd like to kick off our discussion with you, Dr. Collier-Thomas. Much of your scholarship has focused on the history of African American women, their role as abolitionists, activists in voting rights and civil rights, and their role in the fabric of our nation. We've called our discussion Harriet Tubman and the Future of Democracy. We are familiar with her larger-than-life role on Underground Railroad, and much of it unfolding right here in Philadelphia And right here at the Johnson House Historic Site, the site for one of our co-sponsors tonight. But far less is known about her role in the quest for voting rights and the 15th Amendment that granted Black men the right to vote, and the 19th Amendment that granted women the right to vote. Can you pull all of this together and put all of this in perspective for us?
Well, I'll try. I want to sanction that everybody should buy this book, They Carried Us. It is excellent. And while it includes individuals like Tubman in the book, it's primarily dedicated to a latter period, which is very, very important, because if we can say that most people don't know much about the earlier period, they hardly know anything about the more recent period from the 1940s on. This huge book is worth your time. Okay, so buy it. Thank you very much, Jovita, for that wonderful introduction. I want to begin here with Harriet Tubman and include some other details about her and another side. Now, as I wrote a note to Jovita, I told her, I have taught at Temple University for 33 years. Most of my students have never heard of her. I'm lucky if they know who Martin Luther King Jr. is. I mean, this is the status of what we deal with now. So I do a lot of explaining and a lot of background, but the internet has been a wonderful resource, but it has created problems for us in educating our children because they're wedded to Facebook and everything else online. Okay. During her long and fruitful life, Harriet Tubman was best known for her work as an Underground Railroad conductor. However, during the Civil War, she also worked as a Union scout and spy and a nurse. Born in 1820 to enslaved parents on a plantation in Dorchester, Maryland, few would have predicted that the small, slight-built, ordinary slave girl would become one of the most famous women, Black or white, of her time and really of all times. There was nothing special about her environment or her uneventful early life. In an interview in 1855, Tubman said, I grew up like a neglected weed, ignorant of liberty, having no experience of it. However, unlike most of the enslaved, she was nurtured and cared for in a large family that remained intact. In 1849, and at the age of 29, she escaped to freedom in Pennsylvania. Within 8 years, she managed to free her entire family, including her parents, who were over 70 years of age. Tubman became involved with abolitionists, white feminists, and political and military leaders. Her singular purpose was to work for the freedom of enslaved people. She allied with John Brown prior to his raid on Harper's Ferry. As her fame spread, white progressive leaders provided financial support for her work and sheltered her in their homes when necessary. Usually during her trips to the South or when attending anti-slavery feminist meetings. She was acknowledged as a leader in the abolitionist movement, which had a strong organization in Philadelphia. It was in Philadelphia that she met William Still, the director of the General Vigilance Committee, and other well-known and well-organized abolitionists. The first organized society against slavery was established in Philadelphia in 1775, the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery, the relief of free Negroes unlawfully held in bondage, and for improving the condition of African Americans. Philadelphia is an important place in American history, and lest the people in Pennsylvania forget, in even current history. Look at voting. All right. Tubman settled in Auburn, New York in 1857. Auburn was known as the center of progressive thought and abolition, and women's suffrage thrived in Auburn. During the Civil War, Tubman served as a scout for the Union Army. In the aftermath of the war, Tubman was active in Reconstruction work and women's rights organization. She believed that racial liberation and women's liberation were linked. She also believed in racial equality and thought that Blacks and whites needed to work together. In an effort to strongly link Tubman to the National Association of Colored Women, there is a great deal of misinformation that was spawned in 2020 during the centennial of women's suffrage. For example, Tubman is being acclaimed as a founder of the NACW and a close friend of Susan B. Anthony. The truth is that by the 1890s, Tubman was desperately in need of money to support herself and her family. And though she was not in the best of health, had to find jobs during menial labor. The NACW raised funds to support her and invited her to attend and deliver a talk at its first annual convention in 1896. I found a wonderful photograph that I included in Jesus, Jobs, and Justice, African American Women and Religion, that shows you this photo of all these well-known famous women who helped to found the National Association of Colored Women. And they're on the third row. And she's sitting next to, and I can't remember her name right at this moment, but she was the daughter of Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin from Boston. Her daughter is sitting on the right of Tubman. They made sure that Tubman was on that photo and at that meeting for history. And so we can see it now in this period and see the connection that she had and the love they had for her. Tubman's appearance and speech at the NACW's meeting was described in A History of the Club Movement as, quote, a momentous occasion. And I quote, Mrs. Tubman stood alone on the front of the rostrum. The audience, who not only filled every seat, but also much of the standing room in the aisles, rose as one person and greeted her with the waving of handkerchiefs and clapping of hands. You remember handkerchiefs, don't you? That most of us grew up with. Handkerchiefs and gloves. Oh, Lord. Mrs. Tubman was much affected by the hearty reception that was given her. Tubman died in 1913, but her legacy and her fame have endured. primarily because of the interest in the role of women in history and literature. The civil rights Black Power movement of the 1960s and 70s, and subsequently the women's rights movement, and recently the centennial of women's suffrage, have reintroduced Tubman and many other iconic figures to a new generation. Now, I want to address very briefly some of the questions that were posed to us that will help to open up the discussion we're going to have. And the first question, while the abolitionist movement brought Black and white women together, what happened after the Civil War? Specifically, what happened following the introduction of the 15th Amendment? How did it impact their solidarity? Black suffrage was resisted by the white South, including most white women. White suffragists in particular were dismayed and angered to discover that the 15th Amendment would only enfranchise Black men. While some white suffragists had been associated with the abolitionist movement, it did not mean that they believed in equality with those who had been enslaved. The women's suffrage movement was split over the issue. Some white suffragists supported Black male suffrage, most opposed it. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were in the forefront of the opposition, arguing that white women were more deserving of the franchise than Black men. Black women also supported the vote for women, those few Black women who were there at that meeting. However, most felt that race superseded gender, and that if universal suffrage were not possible, it would not be in their interest as Black women to argue for women to be enfranchised before Black men. What were Harriet Tubman's ideas and beliefs about equality? And how did that impact her approach to suffrage?
Dr. Thomas, Collier-Thomas, I beg your pardon. First of all, I'd like to interrupt just for a moment to include Fasaha and Alina in that same discussion, because they cover some of that area. And before we move on and bring them into the conversation, I also want to put out there that a member of the Philadelphia Commission for Women, Dr. Doreen Lowry, is a vice president currently for the National Association of Colored Women. So our participation in that organization continues today. So with that being said, I'd like to bring in Fasaha and Alina into the discussion in terms of that whole idea of what happened when the 15th Amendment and the 19th Amendment, and how did that impact the women's movement and Black women in particular. So unmute yourselves.
Well, it no doubt shook it up, but quite frankly, it needed to be shook up. As I'm listening to Professor Collier-Thomas speak, I'm thinking about that adage about people showing their true colors. And in fact, that really is a good way to describe what Anthony and Mott, Katie Stanton, they, and the other white women who were, and I'm going to say the predominant number of white women who were, a part of that movement for suffrage, for women to have the vote. It's as long as it was, going to be in their best interest to include blacks or black men and black women, then it was fine. But as soon as they got word that, it was going to be them, and not you, there's true, as I said, their true colors were shown. And that led to a splinter. I think the splinter was already there, though, in the movement. I don't think it was a new splinter. I just think that, when you get injured and you mess around with it long enough, it starts to fester. And so then we saw them for what they were, and we saw that what that was a reflection of Negroes at that time not being worthy, and a reflection of their racism as well.
One of the things that I want to say really is that I really think that we need to look at the abolitionist movement as really the first historical moment when the ideas and practice of a multiracial democracy were explored. And I would have to say that based on what happened after, after the passage of the 15th Amendment, that the tension that was developed within the abolitionist movement and subsequent to the abolitionist movement, we really were not up to it, okay? And by we, I mean America was not up to it. In 1869, when Susan B. Anthony said, if intelligence, justice, and morality are to be placed in the government, then let the question of the women be brought up first, and that of the Negro last. And I think that she's raising a question there that we're struggling with today. Which Americans are real Americans, and are all Americans equal? And we have to confront that. We have to confront that as people who believe in democracy. If that's what we say we believe in, then these are questions that we're going to have to confront.
Well, I'd just like to add 2 points there. But Stanton went beyond the pale in the discussion about white women first before black men. When she went on to describe black men as vicious animals subject to rape in terms of white women. And I mean, it was vicious, but not only that, the two of them, they organized with George Train. George Train, who was one of the most vicious white racists, and through his publication, publicized that kind of thing. So all along, as we will see, we have to question Stanton and Anthony and ask, like the kids, what kind of game were they playing? Even as I would say, in the so-called friendship with Tubman and African-American women. And we will get on with that. But
if
that was a particular
moment.
If
I could follow up with that, one of the things that I think, and I've done a fair amount of reading in this area, and one of the things that I find really fascinating is that let's take them at their word, and let's say that Stanton and Anthony and that whole crowd, let's say that they truly were interested in women gaining the right to vote. It is still not clear to me which women they were talking about, because clearly, if Black people didn't have the right to vote, Black women would not have the right to vote. And so their idea of women was very constricted and meant really only white women.
And I think that played out in the Jim Crow era. So we saw Jim Crow was a response to Black people having the right to vote. But I'd also like to throw out to all of you, in terms of this, what we know and what we saw, especially with activism and advocacy around the 19th Amendment, what we saw play out was white privilege. How does that play out today in feminism?
I would say it, and I argue that this nation was founded as a white supremacist nation, and that thread is the thread that runs through our history, and that we can see it very clearly. 2 or 3 years ago, I delivered the keynote speech at the European and the British American Studies Association. And it was on the birthday of, not the birthday, I think it was on the day when he was assassinated. And they asked me, well, to whatever you speak on, say a little bit about King. It took me about 8 months to decide what I was going to do with this speech. And so I entitled the speech, From King to Trump, the Enduring Significance of White Supremacy for America. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, those joint association, it was the largest conference held in Europe. That you could hear a pin drop when I started with that. And I went on to talk about the fact that I grew up in Jim Crow segregated America, coming and going to Milledgeville, Georgia, and experiencing seeing the Klan marching in front of my grandparents' house, and one of them stopping and saying, that's where Tom Collier lives. My grandfather, I don't know how he survived. He in the 30s and 40s was out there pushing voter for Blacks to register to vote in Milledgeville, Georgia. And I don't know how much you know about Milledgeville, Georgia.
I do. I
Yeah.
have family
Well,
there.
yeah, you know, it was a deep racist place. Okay, and it was known for lots of other things, and it was the capital of Georgia before the Civil War. So I went on to tell them about that experience and my experience right till I gained my majority there in the South, and how that played out, and how I look back now at that, and when we gained our so-called rights with the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And I tell my students now, where are we now? And there is no kind of front being put on. I mean, it is in your face. They are taking you back to a simpler place in time, using the same tactics they used in the 19th century to strip you of all your rights that you've never really truly had and been able to enjoy. Okay.
Yeah.
So America, we have to be clear about America and what America is. Now, of course, for all of us who were in the civil rights movement and all that before, and I remember being at a conference for the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History, and that this particular fair, everybody was clicking their glasses of wine. We were in Cleveland. Yeah, we won everything. You know, they were so happy. They were talking about all the white schools that they were going to at that time. That was some point in the 70s. And I said, I'm not so sure about this. But they all felt that we had won. Where are we now? What does that say about America, the America of the very period we're talking about with Harriet Tubman and our struggle?
Well, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I want to go back real quickly, just so I don't forget this point that I want to make, and then address your question a little bit more, Javita. Just going back to this notion of the word women, white women, black women, black men, if we want to add black men into it. My reading and my understanding tells me something that we haven't said, which is that women like Harriet Tubman, she was considered a woman until the threat of her getting the vote. Rather instead, until the threat of the black man getting the vote, was entered into that. And so where I'm going with this is that in those times when all those conversations were going on, what you saw was the stripping of humanity from Black people once again. Those people, those men are this and that. And suddenly Black women could not be associated as the same or equal with white women. And that's something I don't think I hear quite enough in these kind of conversations. And I hope that I'm being clear with it myself, which is that we were not considered people. They were not considered people at the point that the threat of the vote being given to Black men and Black women, being in support of them, everything just came out of the woodwork again, that they were barely trying to veil, as far as I'm concerned. And then going forward, Jovita, to your question, certainly and significantly so, the fact that we have politicians sitting in Congress, I'm saying in the United States Congress and in states, and in the Senate, U.S. Senate, folks who clearly espouse, racial hatred, perhaps even white supremacist ideas. I mean, that should tell us where we're at. To answer the question, where are we at? We're at a very, very scary place. Again, tampering with congressional districts, that scares me. But what really scares me are those people up there in Washington, down there in Washington, D.C. I'm saying up because I'm in Virginia. You guys are in the north, so I'm trying to get it right. They could just do whatever they want to do and say whatever they want to say.
And after Trump, they're very free now. They're in your face.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that it's interesting. I mean, I think that, to put too fine a point on it, I think that Black people have been the only people in the country who have had to be given the right to vote, twice at least, through the Reconstruction Amendments and then the Voting Rights Amendment, Voting Rights Act. And we may need something else, because I think that the thread that you identified, Bettye, about white supremacy as part of the founding of the country is something that we really need to grapple with. And when I say we need to grapple with it, I mean, we certainly have to grapple with it. People of color, Black people have to grapple with it. But I think it's really, really time that a lot of white people grapple with it. What does it mean to live in a country and to support a country that has as a core foundational belief the idea that this is a white country? This is a white country. What does that mean? And I no longer have any kind of expectation that I don't believe that all white people believe in white supremacy, but I also don't believe that nearly enough fight against it.
Well, in
Something-
1990, Time magazine, the front page of the front cover of Time magazine announced that in 2046, the United States would no longer be a white majority nation. That shocked America, and all of this came out, the Tea Party and all the other things. White people said, what? You know? And so now we've ended up at this point when they're telling you to get out of our country.
Mm-hmm.
On January the 6th last year at the White House, they announced we're going to take back our country. Okay, take it back from whom? The Native Americans need to be taking back their land and their country. Okay,
Yeah.
this is where
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
I argue that most white people are racist. You have to look at this in terms of a line. There are those who are all the way over here on the extreme. There are others at different places on that line from here to here. But that's what they are taught and they see from the time they are born. Okay. And it has not changed. We could go on and on about that. Yes, Harriet Tubman, she believed and pushed for equality.
Mm.
And she believed that it was possible. She
Mhm.
never gave up her hope. But the reality is the period in which she was in her decline and died, 1896 is Plessy versus Ferguson.
Right.
Okay. And you go from there to, 1965, we are now free and we celebrate. Okay. And then you start going back. You know, that is quite a story to tell. And one other point, and you'll see a lot of this in my forthcoming book, In Politics to Stay, A Political History of African American Women. In one of the chapters, I think I was referring to Elizabeth Catt, who became the head of the League of Women's Voters. She was the former president of the White Women's Organization. And she made this statement in the 1940s about all the jobs that women had and so forth and so on. And so I made the statement there that when she spoke, she was speaking about white women because it was natural to her as a white woman, because when they spoke about these things, they didn't even consider you. When almost 60% of Black women were domestic servants and Black men were in servile positions as well and were still in the fields with sharecropping and tenant farmers.
Dr. Collier-Thomas, that reminds me, I hate to cut you off because I want to move on to one of the other issues. But what that reminds me of is how much I detested take your daughters to work day. It was very much in the mindset. It was an elitist mindset of white women. What Black woman who was a domestic wanted to take her daughter to work? Or if she was a chambermaid, to take her daughter to work to scrub toilets. And so that thoughtlessness and elitistness and classism and racism has been a continuing thread. And so, like I said, I never liked it and still don't like it because of the framework that it was set up upon, because it was not who was included, but who was excluded. And the exclusion was of Black women and women of color. So
yeah, I don't know why you're saying that. Makes me think of another point that if we haven't touched on, we really should. Going back to again Harriet Tubman, and it's not about take your daughters to work, but it certainly was about, let's have this famous, well-known woman that is Harriet Tubman. Let's show her off and have her go around to all of these conventions and for us, and and speak in the name of women's suffrage, but then hey, now we really don't feel really comfortable again with calling you a woman, kind of thing. You're not a white woman. I'm just going back to that. Where I'm going with this as well is that I really think that two things. One is that as much as Harriet Tubman was a suffragist and was certainly viewed as so, by other Black, I would say compatriots, then including Frederick Douglass and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper and others. I just really felt, whenever I talk about this, I really feel like she was in some ways used by the white women of the suffrage movement, because hey, who doesn't want to hear what Harriet Tubman has to say, right? And even when, and they always want us to sort of start with, tell us more about all of your wonderful adventures as Moses. That's two. I said two, but I really have one more to make it three, which was simply that her work as a suffragist did not start. If you read it, you read it all of a sudden at the end of her work, as our Moses, she became involved in, the fight for the push for the vote for women. I know that all of us agree that Harriet Tubman was always interested in pushing for equality.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And Javita, I want to thank you for one of the sources that you sent to us as we were, organizing and putting ourselves together for this program. And one of them was a video where the woman by the name of Karen Hill, who's president and CEO of the historic Harriet Tubman House, I believe it's called. What she said about Harriet Tubman was that, pretty much for Harriet Tubman, equality and suffrage were these parallel tracks for her. It wasn't that, and they all, to her, to Harriet, that is, equated with the push for they were tied to emancipation from bondage, and emancipation from being viewed as a second-class citizen whose will could not be exercised through the vote. And so I just think that those are important points to put out as a part of this conversation. And I'd be curious to know what y'all think about all that.
Well, I fully agree with that. And in fact, I had written that here to talk about as well, that they trotted her out. That's the way I put it. Just like other Blacks who they think that they can use to do that. But when it comes to hard issues in terms of the race, the support is not there. And so, for example, while they trotted her out, they over there with Stanton and Anthony and in their particular movement, they frequently did not invite Frances Harper to share the stage. And I have great details on that I traced
Yeah,
through.
well,
At their national conventions, they used Douglas, and I can't think of the other, the name of the other Black band, but I have him there too, who was there in Seneca Falls, but when they started their association. And what I argue, and I argued earlier in some other work, I think it's the article that I published years ago on Harper, which was the first article on Frances Harper. And Harper, they saw her as every bit of their equal and more as she participated in those associations. That was not the kind of Negro they wanted. Okay.
Dr.
And-
Bettye,
Yes.
we have less than 10 minutes left. And I think that it's worthy enough between all of you women here today. I think we have enough to talk about on Frances Ellen Watkins Harper to do one program just about her. But in the time that we have left, what I would like for each of you to do is, okay, what can we learn from Harriet Tubman? What are the tools that we could get from her to address dangerous, we all know that we are in dangerous times right now, today. We know that 2022 midterm elections, we know that our right to vote is being threatened all over the country. What are the things that we can do now to at least have an input and do the work? What is it that we need to do the work that Harriet Tubman put before us? And each of you can address that. And I'll start with you first, Dr. Bettye.
Well, I gave serious thought to that question. I wrote, Harriet Tubman did not wait for others to take up the task of freeing her and her family and other enslaved people on her plantation in Dorchester, Maryland. She, as a lone, slightly built woman, took on the task and succeeded. First and foremost, she believed in herself and was willing to sacrifice her life in the struggle for freedom. She provided a model of courage that few persons then or now would embrace. Given that the majority of Black people are poor and either unemployed or underemployed in service jobs that pay little, the most important thing to them is day-to-day survival.
Thank you.
They cannot afford to take off time during the week to vote. And at least 30 states have passed laws restricting Sunday voting. Many of these people do not have automobiles and are unable to travel to the few distant polling stations now set up to make it difficult for them to vote. And unfortunately, many who wish to vote by ballot are having their ballots rejected because they are unable to provide documents such as birth certificates. We're in a quandary at this particular moment, and we have not quite decided, our leaders or others, how we are going to address this, okay? It is sitting there. Tragically, we're caught up in a moment of practical war in Ukraine. There's so much going on that deflect from our particular issue, although it is mentioned. And might I add, the nomination of the first Black woman to the Supreme Court, and the discussion today was the Republicans are already massing there in the Senate to do everything they can to strip her of some of the glory that Biden covered her with yesterday. She's all this and all that. And so that's where we are. She is not going to get the kind of respect that, what is that woman's name? Comey Barry?
Yes, Amy Coney Barrett.
That she got, and Amy Coney Barrett doesn't have half of the credentials that she has, or even experience. So
thank you very much. And then I'd like for some parting words from Sissy and Fasaha. Thank you.
Well, I would just say that one of the things that a couple of things that I learned from Harriet Tubman's work was, one was the power of networking. Mm-hmm. You got to admit, she knew how to establish relationships and she knew how to use those relationships. And the reason that I want to say that is because all too often, when we don't have the time to do something ourselves, or we don't have the money to do something ourselves, we just ignore and don't do. And I think that if we learn how to better network, then we can point each other in the directions where the strength is, where the money is, where the other people are who can help. We all should be behind Stacey Abrams at this point, for example.
Thank you. Fasaha.
I think that the thing that I really relish about Harriet Tubman is she was someone who everyone in this country needs to hold up as a hero. She says, we are what we do, not what we talk about, not what we say to, our husbands, whatever. We are what we do. She believed that. She believed that in putting her body on the line, leaving Dorchester, really not knowing that whether she would ever see her family again, even though that was her motivation for leaving. And I think that the idea that we need to put our money where our mouth is, and when I say we, I am really talking about we who believe in freedom. That's really what I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about Black people, and I'm not just talking about white people. I'm talking about people who believe in the capacity of human beings to really pursue their destinies. We who believe in that, we need to work on it.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you for our guests today. I had some closing remarks, but I'd like to give the end of this program to Cornelia Swenson, who is the executive director of Johnson House, who is one of our co-sponsors tonight. And because of a technical glitch, she's now able to join us. Connie, turn your camera on and please give us some parting words about the work of Johnson House.
Unmute.
Unmute, Connie.
And also turn on your camera.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, for all of you that have, first of all, Johnson House is a site on the Underground Railroad. There's information about Johnson House. They carried us, the Philadelphia Commission for Women, our schedule for the other events that we are going to be doing, weekly events throughout the entire month of March. Tomorrow, we have a program at noon with the author of Civil Rights Queen, on Judge Constance Baker Motley, who was instrumental in the civil rights movement. She was instrumental in Brown versus Board of Education case, and that will be tomorrow at noon. And the registration link is in the chat. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Have a great evening.
And thank you, Javita.